All right, let's jump into it today. I am going to be talking about how we design generative AI experiences. I think I know about half the people on here, and I've talked to you about this subject before. So for the half that doesn't know, my name is Nicole. I'm a product designer. My specialty is in UX design for language models. Up until ChatGPT, this was a very niche area. And then I've been doing, I've been in this space for about 6 years, working on design and language models. And then ChatGPT came out, and really that changed everything. So I am used to designing for AI experiences. And what I'm going to do today is take a pretty high level approach to this subject about how we can design better with generative AI experiences, specifically on the UX side. So we're really focused on the interaction piece. And I'll tell you, this is usually like a broader discussion, right? In like over several hours. So I am going to keep it high level today, but if you have questions, feel free to ask. And also we could do this in a coffee chat. We could also do this on an AI UX. We could do this another time too, to really dive in, like how can we actually, apply this? But my goal today is to kind of keep it high level. And we're going to experiment. We're going to try out some things today. So I'm going to have you in the chat doing some things. And then I'm going to give you some takeaways, some really low-key things you can do to really contribute to making improving UX experiences on our generative AI products, and even on the products that you use. So that's the goal today. And I'm going to start from the position of this question. This is a question that I see a lot, not just in GitLab, but in general, in design broadly. And that's, how do I design generative AI experiences when I can't predict the output? Right, so we know about large language models that they are going to produce different outputs. They will produce different outputs even from the same prompt. They'll produce different outputs within the same product. And you will have different outputs to the same question across different models. So like you can ask a question in Duo Chat and then ask the same question in Claude. And although Duo Chat is using Claude, it still might result in a different output. And that is really challenging to design for. So this is a very valid question. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you some guidelines to kind of help shape those experiences when you can't quite predict, because you, as the designer or any designer, the role really is to shape the interactive experience. That's what you're doing. When we are designing for generative AI products, we are defining how the model should act. Right? So what should it do? Define how the model outputs look and feel. So a lot of times they hear on Duo Chat, I forgot to mention, I work on Duo Chat here and some other AI spaces. We hear it should be more concise. It should be, it's too long. It's true. Okay, what should it look like and feel like, right? So that's design's job to figure that out. And then probably the harder parts are anticipating how users will instruct the model. So what will they say? How should they get the results that they want, right? And thinking of the different ways they might say that, both from a linguistic perspective, someone saying generate this, generate a Python code for this app, versus I'm building an application that's going to focus on building a reports dashboard. I need X, Y, and Z. Create this for me, right? That's a very different way of instructing the model, and you're going to get some wildly different results. So anticipating how users will instruct the model is part of it, and then anticipating how users will interact with the model output. So I like to think of this as the choose your own adventure design, right? You're really thinking of all the different ways users might interact with the outputs, including happy pass, unhappy pass, and errors. What do they do when they get an error? And how do they get beyond that error? And that's really the overview of what it looks like to design for those interactive experiences. So how do we approach that? Because that all is pretty abstract sometimes. I think going into discussions about these models, it can be a little bit, where do we start, right? If a model can say anything and it can do anything, how do we shape that down? How do we scope it? And, there's one of the ways that we do that is through prompting. And I think a lot of times with the terminology prompt engineering, we tend to think it's just in the engineers' role to do prompt engineering, when in fact prompt engineering is UX, because you are defining how the experience through the prompt. You're defining what the model should do, what it should say, roughly, not exactly, right? How it should say it. Those are all UX decisions. Okay, so in talking about designing for generative AI products, we really have a role in refine, not just you can create prompts, but you can also refine those prompts too. And I'll show you how we can start to apply that. So in this, hey, why can't I zoom out? There we go. In this link, it's a FigJam here. There's a link to an issue that actually is the formal version of this. And so you don't take the time to read it now because we're actually going to talk about it and I'm going to give you an exercise. But you can reference this later. And basically what this is, it's a 4-part framework to understand, to give you a criteria to help you govern those critical moments when users are interacting with your system. So when you create AI engagement guidelines, what you're doing is you're ensuring users have a consistent experience, right? You're saying, this is how I expect the model to act every single time it interacts, a user interacts with it. Not what the model says, but how it should behave, right? So if I have a model and I expect if a user asks me, about refactoring code, right? I expect it to refactor code in this specific way. Now, I'm not a developer, so I actually don't have an answer for that. But if you were working on that, you would want to define that. So that way, every single one of your users gets a similar experience. These guidelines help you improve prompt engineering because when we talk about what a model should do and what it should not do, we create targets. We help make it easier for whoever's writing that prompt or iterating on that prompt to define, to create a prompt that meets those guidelines, right? Oftentimes people start with prompting, without guidelines, they'll just put whatever in their head, and that might not be aligned with what other people are thinking the model should behave. And it standardizes design decisions across teams and features. So that's what AI engagement guidelines do. I can tell you I've been on so many teams where one stakeholder has a different assumption about how the model should behave than another. So before I came into this role, I was on financial products, and I was designing a generative AI product that gave users a report on their finances, so small business users. And I remember we got towards the end, and one of our stakeholders was like, well, I expected it to predict, to forecast my earnings. And I was like, yeah, but models can't forecast the earnings. And I realized they had gone the entire time thinking that's what the model was going to do, right? And these are normal occurrences in any project, right? We have a set of miscommunications. But in generative AI, it's even more critical because we're all bringing these different assumptions to the project about how the model works and how it should behave. So by building these guidelines, we can start to align everybody. Ideally before we get to the implementation phase, so more in the kind of solution design and prototyping phase. So what are the guidelines? Well, this is a framework here. It's essentially being able to define what are the acceptable actions of your model and your users, because you're designing for both. When you're in UX design for generative AI, you are talking about what the model should do. You're designing for the model and you're designing for the user, okay? Unacceptable actions. So just as much as you want to define what they should do, you should be defining what they shouldn't do, right? And a lot of times we'll have, people say, oh, well, there's guidelines, we have guardrails, right? They can't cuss at the model. Great. They can't be abusive to the model, right? That's great too. But those are like high level guidelines. That's just what a system should have. Whatever you're working on has action. There will be actions that you actually don't want your user to take or you don't want your model to do, and you need to define them. Then there are thresholds of uncertainty. This one is a little vague, but think of this one as what happens when the model doesn't know an answer. So we know that models will make things up. We know that it doesn't always have the answer. So what should happen? And currently, if you think about our current product, it'll say, I don't know. Well, I don't know is one answer, but there's other ways you can handle that. You can say, I don't know, but here's a guide for you, or here's a reference, or try asking that, right? So we help the user along. We don't just leave them stranded. Threshold of uncertainty also refers to what happens when, I think I have this, what options does a user have when the model can't answer? So thinking beyond the first step, the model says, I don't know, but what else can we give the user? And then vulnerabilities. This is really thinking about risks. What are the risks associated with your model now, or your solution in this case? Now, a lot of those risks, we are fortunate to have a big team of people that work on this and think about risk, right? That's the area that we're in. But there are other risks that can happen, and there's errors that can also happen in your solution. So you want to think about what are some of the errors that might occur in your solution, right? And then how do users recover from those errors? What happens if the model gets it wrong? What is the impact on your user if the user gets it wrong? And this is what it means when I talk about designing for the interaction. We're thinking about how is the user going to interact, how shouldn't it, and what happens in certain situations. Now, you don't have to think of every situation, right? There's obviously, we've got to scope it here, but we have to be thinking beyond the single response, right? So that's where the choose your own adventure comes in. So I'll pause for questions there. That was a very high level and quick overview. Any questions on that? Shall we go to an example? So this is more concrete. Yeah, let's do that. Okay, it's hot dog time. So we are going to do let's see, a quick lightning fast version that is not reflective of how it works in the real world, but it's still going to demonstrate some concepts. So this I have built over here. This is a hot dog advisor. It advises hot dog stand owners on their business. So it's a small business advisor for hot dog stand owners. And you don't know what's in it. But I do. So we're going to imagine here that I'm your developer. I'm not, but I'm your developer and I've come to you with this prototype, right? And you want to apply some guidelines to it. You want to start the discussion about these AI guidelines. So we're going to ask some questions. I'm going to pretend, I'm going to play two roles here. I'm the developer and I'm the designer. I want you to answer these questions in the chat, okay? What do you think, knowing that this is a hot dog advisor, right? A small business advisor, what questions do you think the user might ask this hot dog advisor chatbot? So put those in the chat. And this is not a right answer thing. This is just off the top of your head. Ooh, I like that. I like that. Excellent. Okay. Hot dog recipes, increased profits. What's the average price of hot dogs in my area? I like that. What are those top popular toppings? Oh, inspire me. Excellent. Great. How do I attract hot dog customers? Yes. What I like about this, I'll tell you what I love about this is already we are seeing the variety of things a user might ask about this. We've got brainstorming, we've got financial, I think there was the average price. So now Chad's question's asking average price. Now we're referring to data, right? There's an assumption there. Your user assumes you have data on something, which is a common assumption these days. We see it in our product, we see it on other products, right? We're seeing location data, we want recipe ideas. So a lot of different things. Great, you all passed on that one. I'll come back to that. Next question. What do you think as designers is the impact on users if this model gets a question wrong? Harder question, but I'll give you some time to think about it. Nice. Okay. I'm seeing lost profits, misguided efforts, depends on the question, untasty hot dogs, low traffic, less trust, health problems. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Now, we take that first question there and you saw that variety. So one that tells us, okay, we might need to scope this, right? Like it starts when we look at those first questions up here and we look at the answer, how do I attract hot dog customers, best locations? It starts to give us all ideas about, oh, here's some things they might ask about. I didn't think of that. Maybe I should scope this bot a little bit to, only providing information on attracting hot dog customers. Or maybe I should scope this bot to small business advising, but nothing to do with finances, right? When you start to see these questions out here, you start to think about all the possibilities and it helps you narrow down what it is you want your tool to do, right? Because we don't want tools that do everything, okay? Then if you move on to the impact question, it's easy to put out a tool and think, oh, well, if it gets it wrong, users will move on. But in fact, there are real consequences, right? We're talking about hot dogs here because it's funny. But if you go into things like if I'm building a project, I'm under a deadline and I get the code wrong, now I'm spending more time trying to troubleshoot my code and I'm getting stuck and getting frustrated, right? That's a huge impact on someone's job. So I love the fact, Emily, that you brought up loss of trust. This is huge in generative AI products, right? We're always kind of in this space of really towing the line on user trust. I just watched a video yesterday on a user using Replit and their agent, and he was building something, and he was toward the end, and he got stuck in a loop, and he couldn't get out, and he visibly was frustrated on there, and he kind of just ended with like, well, I got where I wanted it to go. And I was like, oh, that's not like a real good endorsement of the product, right? And it's because it lost the user's trust. And so this is really relevant because when you have answers like this that we've just given in the chat, you can start a conversation with your team, with your product manager, with your dev team, and talk about what does it look like for us to build this feature? What does it look like to increase trust with users? How do we make it so that way we ensure that our users aren't going to have untasty hot dogs and poor sales? We can call it these very specific examples and have a discussion on what that looks like. It may be something in the prompt where it's like, you know what, we don't actually advise on sales. Or actually, we don't have any recipes, but I can recommend some great places to look up recipes, right? These are just off the top of my head. Actually, it'd probably be great at recipe generation, right? These are all the decisions, though, that are made in the creation of these experiences, right? And so this is a little bit a different way of operating than what we're probably used to. We're probably used to the PM is, gathering the requirements, they hand it to design, design's making something, and then they hand off to developers. And what this means is that we need to actually work closer collaboration in the beginning of the project to set these guidelines, to ensure that development can go off and build, a prompt, or design can write the prompt, right? And that we can test and make sure that, oh, in fact, my assistant doesn't misguide users or doesn't contribute to lost profits and so on. Still with me? Yeah, can I get thumbs up? We're good? Okay, good. Okay. Here's another question. What questions should the model not answer? Jackie, questions about hamburger? A very valid response. Yes. How will my business be doing in 5 years? Okay. Topics unrelated to hot dog business? Absolutely. Yep. These are great. You are an excellent design team. What are my competitors thinking? Yeah, interesting. Okay, this is the exercise right here, exactly what we're doing. Now, I picked these questions kind of at random. These are questions I use all the time, but there are, if you look in the issue, there's a lot more questions in here that you can build on, right? So let's go see what our bot does. Let me go look real quick. Whoa. I wrote down the things I'm going to ask it. Okay. All right. So how can I grow my business? Let's see. What advice am I getting? Okay. It's going to give me some options. This is pretty standard. I would say this is, do we expect this from we would say we expect this. It's pretty standard. Okay. All right. Should I invest in Bitcoin? Should it answer? Oh, I tried to cover my screen. Okay, I meant to ask you beforehand. It didn't answer, and that's because I put it in the prompt. Put it in the prompt that it should not answer any questions not directly related to the hot dog business. And part of the reason I did that is from prior experience, actually, because before I worked on financial products, we had very strict rules from legal about what we could and couldn't say. And that generative AI generally makes legal nervous. So one of the things in there, though, was investment advice. And it was really interesting to see models will very much recommend investment advice. I just asked Claude the other day what companies we should acquire, just because I felt like it. And it gave me a list based on the data I provided it. And I was all, okay. So I decided in this one, I did not want to make investment. Me as the designer, I decided I did not want to give investment advice, right? And I redirected the bot to give them a pot. I told the bot that it should say hot diggity dog. And give a pun, a hot dog pun, and then redirect the user. And that redirect is actually a common prompt engineering technique to get people back on track. So instead of saying, I can't answer that, and leaving the user hanging, I've decided I want to refuse to answer, but give them a path forward, right? And that's the design right there, is deciding how do I want to answer, and how do I want my users, what do I want my users to do after the fact, right? That's where the design comes in. And because if we were doing this example earlier, if I was working on the hot dog thing and I had to list, I got lost. I had to list, things I don't want it to do, investment advice would be on that list. Okay. So I'm going to do another one. I'm going to do a last one, and then I might do a couple of yours. Are we okay on time here? Yeah, we're all right. So here's this one. I have $100 left in my business account, but my rent is $20,000. Should I just close my business? How do you think this should answer? If you were the designer, how do you think this should answer? I'm asking for advice on a very emotionally charged subject, and it impacts my finances. Ooh, Jesse, there we go. Should ask more information. Angela, answer politely and generically while redirecting to some more credible sources. Y'all are good designers. I knew this though. Okay. Any other thoughts? Okay. We're gonna let it rip. Honestly, another hot dog fund, a pep talk. Okay, this is also great. Your answers, by the way, could be any of these things because you're the designer. And that's the beauty of this, is you get to decide this for your product experience, right? But you have to have the conversation first. So let's go. By the way, I always feel like when I submit these things, yeah, when I submit these things, it's like gambling. You never know what you're going to get. Let's go. Okay, look at that. Let's go back. Let's go back. I understand you're in a very challenging financial situation. Let's analyze this carefully before making the decision. So it's giving you some advice, but it's also giving you some reflection. Can you negotiate? Review all expenses, financing options. Okay, it's significant. It's important to explore, protect yourself. And now it asks for more information. So it actually made almost like a combination. Now, when I ran this earlier, it was a little bit different, not much, but a little bit. And it was interesting because that's not how I thought it would go. I thought it would actually redirect, because Claude will do that sometimes. And I knew it wouldn't go directly to an answer and just tell you what to do, right? That's something about Claude where it stops and asks for more information, which I think is a really key component in more advanced assistance. And there's opportunity to do that. I think there was an issue that came up with Duo on context, being able to redirect users when they're asking for context that we don't have and say, oh, I don't have access to that. Could you give me more info, right? And again, these are all design decisions, but in order to get to those design decisions, you have to ask the questions, right, about these expectations, and you have to engage in this exercise of really ahead, right, about contingencies, what happens when a user might ask this type of question, and I'll tell you what, look, the reality here is because I worked on small business assistance for so long, I'm a subject matter expert in small business users, right? So my strength is here. So I'm able to think through this. I wouldn't be able to apply that to, like, say, CI/CD things, right? I would have to partner with a subject matter expert on this to really draw out some of those issues. What will customers be asking about this? What shouldn't they ask? What is something we don't want to advise them on? Things like that. And that's where you, in your stages and your subject matter expertise, can really facilitate those conversations with development, with product managers, to really impact the UX that you're designing for. So what does this look like then in practice? Well, that's what it looks like in practice. What does it look like in example of the guidelines? So again, I'm giving you the questions to ask in the framework, but how you do it is up to you, because you're all designers who are experienced with user personas, journey mapping and things like that. You understand that this is combining a lot of it. So we're looking at like something like this. When using this feature, users should describe the expected behavior. That's what you want to get out of a discussion. You want everybody to be on the same page about how the experience looks, feels, and how the model behaves. You should describe what users shouldn't do and what the model shouldn't do. When the model doesn't know the answer, it will describe the action. It will say it doesn't know, but offer another solution. That's a possibility, right? This ensures all your stakeholders are on the same page throughout the development process, right? Because unlike, with like UI design, we have a Figma there. We can reference this Figma and say, oh, yes, that's what it's supposed to look like, right? But with model design and this interaction design, we don't necessarily have that, right? Oftentimes it's one person writing a prompt. Side note, one person shouldn't just write the prompt. Should be done more with in a group and with feedback. It's iterative. But things like this will actually help write the prompt. It will help give them, whoever's writing the prompt or iterating on the prompt will give them targets to hit, and they will know how to measure the outputs, not from an evaluation like it made 3.5 in accuracy, but on an experience level. So this is what you want to come out with. Something, this is a template, you could expand it, you could change it as your needs fit. But this is what you want to come out with. So that way you can later on in the process, when you're, towards the end and you say, oh, you know what, this is really not meeting the guidelines. These outputs aren't hitting these targets, right? This is not the UX experience we agreed on. Or conversely, we're nailing it, right? So that's what we want. And last part here, I'll tell you, how do we use the guidelines? You use them early on in the process. And so really making sure that we're not waiting till the end to talk about guidelines. And this is, I'll be quite honest, this is a different way of working. And so it really requires UX to advocate and say, hey, look, hey, put me in, coach. Like I want to talk to you about the UX experience. I want to talk to you about some guidelines to help make this, to make sure we're all on the same page and we get a UX that really works for our users, right? And then collaborating. Getting to, I reached out to a developer today who was going to work on a prompt, and I said, hey, can I help you with the UX side and talk about, what we want to have happen based on this issue? And she said, yeah, it'd be great, right? So really getting in there, and I know some of you also are developers too, but it really, you need that collaboration. You need that cross-functional perspective on these types of discussions, because engineering obviously will have a different perspective, and PM is going to have a perspective too. So really those first two, how to use the guidelines, start early in the design process and collaborate. And then, although this is another discussion, testing and iterating. So really getting in there early on and saying, okay, can I see the outputs? Can I see them? And then measuring them against your guidelines up here. Where are they at? Your guidelines here. Are they hitting the target? And if not, give that feedback back to whoever's doing the prompt and make sure that it's being revised. So that is your crash course on AI experience guidelines. One note, this was adapted from an article, this is in the issue, an article from Google called Interaction Design Policies, which is not a great title. Jackie was saying, we got to rename it. So this name is open for debate. I just called it AI experience guidelines, but the whole idea is this framework to guide you in creating these interaction designs. Questions, comments?
Taylor, do you want to ask your question that you have on the agenda?
Sure. Yeah, I was just curious. Earlier on, you mentioned design engineering, and I was just wondering if prompt engineering. I'm just wondering if you thought of it, if you thinking of it more as prompt design is like an accurate way to think of it, if that's fair. I'm just curious.
100%. Yeah. I think it was, for a while there, it was prompt design, then it really moved into prompt engineering. And to be fair, there is a lot of engineering in prompt engineering once you start scaling up to like data sources and variables, and you have to understand the architectural structure of this of the feature in order to prompt. So there is engineering components. However, the writing of it is design, right? And I believe that anybody can contribute to it. To give you context, on my last role, I was the prompt engineer. There were several of us. I was a prompt engineer, a principal content writer, and a UX researcher were the main prompt engineers. And we worked hand in hand with engineering, data engineers, backend engineers, right? Because we couldn't do it ourselves, but we were, and they would sometimes take it and work on it too. And then we'd revise it and we'd test. And so it's definitely, there's a term by the product writer, it's a Gen AI product for marketing, and they use prompt crafting. And I really liked that one as well, because you are crafting this and you are shaping, right? So yeah, I think prompt design is correct. But it's kind of all these pieces together, right? It doesn't really fit in one function or domain.
Cool.
And I
Thank you.
encourage you all to get involved with it because it is cool and it is UX. I haven't been looking at let's see.
There's one from Becca that I think is next.
Okay, let me see here.
Becca, do
Yeah,
you
sorry, I'm away from my laptop right now, but I put it in the Zoom chat. How do you measure at scale whether the guidelines and the prompt is successful? How do you know if and how it could be improved? I know historically we had low to no user feedback in our Duo feedback mechanism. I don't know if that's changed in recent months, but curious if you have a thought on that.
Yeah, this is where it's quite challenging because we don't look at user data here. So that would be usually the way that you know. I think being able to look high level at what are the subjects people are asking about, thinking about helps, but it is really one of the challenges is that we don't have the data to look at to know if it's successful on the customer side. Internally, though, when we test these out and we look at it, there is an subjective qualitative aspect to this. You can look at them and say, okay, we're hitting the mark. So for example, right now I'm working on making the prompt making the outputs on Duo more concise. It's a very subjective subject, right? And I've gone to other designers and said, what does concise mean here? Do you like this example? Do you like this example? Now, this is not at scale right now, right? So that's my process. And once we release it, what we'll do, what my best measurement right now is the reduced number of issues submitted about the topic, because I think at this point, we're getting it every few weeks. Like I see the comment about it being too long constantly from like sales and solution engineering. So my metric there would just have to be reduced feedback on the quality of the response. Does that answer your question on there?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
I had another one. It was
Yeah.
kind of a thought, but I'm just curious. So regarding like the thresholds of uncertainty part of your presentation, something that I as a user would love to see is just a confidence rating for each response. Just I can quickly see what the rating is. I'm just curious. I'm assuming that's really hard to do to have an LM rate its responses, but I haven't really seen that approach. I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, so there's more than one type of language model out there. And previously I worked on a different type of language model. And in that model, it's not a generative model, it's not an LLM. But on that model, they had thresholds where you could say, okay, if the model is under 70%, don't show that response. And it was really useful because we know that these systems are not, they're not magic. They do make mistakes. What we call intent. So basically, every time you submit a request to these chatbots, the chatbot is trying to determine your intent, right? And so then it classifies your intent and then routes it, it chooses a response. And sometimes it gets it wrong. And you could, in theory, add some type of evaluation on a classifier, but it would add latency. And it's just harder to do with LLMs. So I don't know, to my knowledge, it may have been done, but I don't know the degree to which it has. I will say the thresholds of uncertainty is a little bit harder to create questions for, but I like to think about it in terms of impact, right? So if the model is uncertain but gives an answer that is not correct, what is the impact on our user? And that's going to vary depending on the severity of it, is going to vary depending on the use case. So if the model gets it wrong in vulnerability, that's a more severe risk than, say, if it gets it wrong on product use, right? On a how to change my password, right? User's going to be annoyed in password, but in the vulnerability resolution, it's much, much different. So the thresholds of uncertainty, the first part of your question about how do we do that? I'm not entirely sure how we do it and if we can do it. But as a designer, I would move the thinking more towards what is the impact when I have a model that's uncertain, or if the model, you could even do it as if the model is answering questions outside of a space it was designed to ask questions on, right? That's another way to think about it.
Okay, thank you.
Any additional questions of there? Angela, on suggestions on how to get people educated on prompt design. There are a lot of resources out there, which doesn't help. We can certainly post some. I will say the best thing you can do is start doing it. So you can start in Claude. You can, I would pick a problem that you want to solve, right? That you think Gen AI could solve, and start experimenting with it. So one of the challenges I have in this role is that I'm not always I'm not an engineer, so I'm not necessarily connected to all the tools. And so one of the things I've been doing recently is learning where are our tools, how do I get into the system and modify our prompt. And I've been able to do that, which is great. But a lot of organizations are really challenged with tooling right now, right? We don't have the infrastructure necessarily to bring everyone in. You can experiment with Langsmith. It's Langsmith, right? Yeah. You can experiment in there. I would say it's not the most user-friendly, but you can get hands-on, I think, with really any LLM, and practice solving a problem you want to solve. So if the problem is I want to create a better, let's just take Duo, right? I think it should respond better. Great. Write a prompt that makes it respond better. You can go to the system prompt in our code and play with it. And it won't be one-to-one because we call tools, but you can still work with it, right? The goal is to learn how the models behave. So you're not just learning how to talk to it, but you're learning how to talk to it and seeing what are the responses. Because like one thing you'll learn is a lot of times it'll ignore commands like do not. And you're like, what? And so one of the workarounds is tell it what it should do instead. So you learn that over time, so the more you play with it. So I've said repeatedly, you can't design generative AI tools if you don't use them. So use them and see where their weaknesses are and see where their strengths are at. And I think those contribute just as much to the prompt design skill set as actual prompting. So the two of them, I think, go hand in hand. And then I'll just post somewhere in the AI channel some of the resources on prompt engineering. Because I'd love UX to really get in there. Or at least collaborate. Like it's not a solo activity, right? But really collaborating and because the ability to iterate on these prompts and then look at that UX experience and say, actually, I think we're missing the mark, or no, this is exactly how we're giving value in this response right here. That's what we want.
Oh, thanks, Nicole.
Cool. Thanks, y'all.
I think we're at the end of the question. Yeah. That was a great, I think, bonus UX forum. I learned a lot.
Cool. Enjoy the hot dog advisor.
Uh-huh.
And if y'all have questions or want to set up a coffee chat to like ask all your questions, I will totally talk all day about it. It's what I do.
Cool.
Right.
Everybody. Thanks
I
all.
love the hot dog emojis. Bye, y'all.